Lyndon.
Hey, Tim.
What are you doing? I was expecting Shelby. What's going on?
I'm giving her a break this month because we're talking about lake bed mapping, which happens to be one of my favorite things.
Okay. All right. Well then welcome to the Gloss live stream for August 2023. Lyndon Brinks, my colleague and friend. I'm happy that you're here. I'm also very happy that we're talking about lake bed mapping. So I know it's one of my favorite things, and you said it's one of your favorite things. I think I know why, but tell the audience why.
Well, believe it or not, Tim, we only have at most 15% of the Great Lakes lake bed mapped to high resolution.
Wow. I mean, I knew it was low. I didn't realize it was that low. So, okay, you said high resolution. What does high resolution mean? Because if my mom's watching, I know my mom's probably watching, and she probably knows this already by now. But what does high resolution really mean?
Well, high resolution, or it's also sometimes called data density, refers to the amount of depth points for a given area. The higher the density of points, the higher the resolution.
Okay. So just to clarify for our users, we're talking about like spatial resolution, the level of detail of things that we can see. So like probably everyone's familiar with what life was like before we had Google Earth and high resolution data. Um, Now we can have high resolution data where we can see more detail in things. I wonder if we've got an example of like high resolution, low resolution. Oh, here we go. So I don't know. I have no idea what this is. This looks like a picture of Earth somewhere, but if I can see it in high resolution, oh, it's a civilian airfield where we can see airplanes. Okay, so I think when we're talking about underwater environment, what we really mean then is if we have low resolution data, we can't see features, and those features could be anything from underwater canyons to sensitive cultural habitat to infrastructure like pipelines and water intakes or fishing pots or unexploded ordnance or airplanes and shipwrecks and all kinds of stuff. But even just general features, it's really important. Now, if you're not familiar with this, and you're probably all familiar with submarines and they go ping, so that's exactly what happens when we collect data underwater or collect bathymetric or underwater topography. We use soundings and they come from surface vessels or sometimes underwater vessels as well. But it literally transmits a ping, a sounding, and then the amount of travel time it takes to come back to the vessel, whatever transmitted it, an echo sounder usually, measures the depth. The more depth measurements we have, the more density we have, as Lyndon described, and the better the resolution that we have in our resulting imagery. And the problem is we don't have that many depths measured in the Great Lakes. Now we do in navigational waterways, so like it's no problem for shipping and safety of navigation, and that's what the Canadian Hydrographic Service and NOAA's Office of Coast Survey regularly measure on a routine basis. But here's an example where it's plenty deep enough for safe navigation, but we still don't have a good understanding of what the high resolution data looks. Now, in this example, we do happen to have high resolution data. So there's the chart, and that's what it looks like with high resolution data. I mean, a phenomenal amount of detail of the types of things that you can see underwater. Do we have any other examples, I wonder, Lyndon?
We do. So I wonder if we can find, we have a image of an underwater intake valve. Right. So yeah, you can see in this one on the left, or it's the left for me, it might be different for you, is a low resolution image of an underwater intake valve, which is an important aspect of infrastructure. And on the right, you can see that's what it looks like in a higher resolution. I think this is about, I want to say 5 meter point spacing, maybe less than that. And here you can actually see the detail of that intake valve and where the water's going in. And, you know, it could be something that we want to monitor for just maintaining infrastructure.
Yeah, and it's good just to know this stuff. I mean, can you imagine if our whole world. Imagine if every time you went to Google Earth, the imagery looked like it did on the left-hand picture that you just showed up on the screen. But that's what it looks like under the Great Lakes. We don't have this kind of detail for the entire Great Lakes. And so there's an initiative called the Lakebed 2030 Initiative, which is to map the entire Great Lakes in high resolution. GLOS, the Great Lakes Observing System, and a number of other partners are huge supporters and leaders of this initiative. Part of that is to raise awareness and exposure for why this is important. But some of the reasons why it's important, I mentioned a couple already, is we need to be able to understand the underwater infrastructure and features, like those canyons or sinkholes or cultural areas or shipwrecks, of which there's over 6,000 in the Great Lakes. It's also helpful just to understand the general topography so that we can understand processes that affect coastline erosion, water levels, beach safety, et cetera. And then even national security plays into this. I mean, I don't think there's a threat to Canada or the US from each other, but you never know. There could be some nefarious actors who want to do some bad stuff underwater. And we need to understand what that underwater environment looks like so we can protect it.
Yeah, exactly. Which brings us to our guest today on the live stream. Up first, we have Brendan Crumweedy from NOAA. He's the Great Lakes Regional Geospatial Coordinator at NOAA's Integrated Ocean and Coastal Mapping. And he helps lead support for the Great Lakes mapping from a number of different perspectives. And he's been working closely with GLOS since 2019 on this project. And after Brandon, we have Derek Niles, who's the president and founder of Orange Force Marine, a survey company based out of Ontario, Canada. OFM is a close partner of GLOS and has been a huge supporter of Lakebed 2030, and they've helped GLOS start a crowdsourced bathymetry program in the Great Lakes.
So you said we're super excited to have Brandon and Derek on board today. Looking forward to the interview with you gentlemen. If you're watching this and you heard Lyndon say crowdsourced bathymetry and you're thinking, I don't know what that means, that's okay. We're going to explain it during this live stream, but you have to stay tuned to learn what crowdsourced bathymetry is. In the meantime, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can click the subscribe button to watch this video and other videos and learn about new videos that the Great Lakes Observing System puts out.
Yeah. So hi, Brandon. Welcome to the Seagull live stream.
Hey, Lyndon.
It's great to have you here. We've got a few questions for you.
Sure.
So first, tell us more about what you do and how that relates to mapping the lake bed of the Great Lakes.
Yeah, so as you said, physical scientist with NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. I'm actually located here in the Great Lakes region up in Duluth, Minnesota. And so my position is actually to serve as the Great Lakes Regional Geospatial Coordinator. And as part of that work, we've got a big project underway funded through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative that is mapping the nearshore parts of the Great Lakes region. So we're primarily focused on collecting data right now to have a better understanding of that nearshore benthic habitat and environments there, because that's where we see a lot of the changes, as Tim pointed out. Things like beach erosion, sediment transport, but it's also where a lot of cultural resources are located as well. Shipwrecks. Note too that water levels in the Great Lakes change over time. Not only do we go up, but we go down. And because of those changes, that nearshore environment is continuously in a state of dynamic change over time. And so our work right now has been really to, getting back to the images you showed earlier, really improve the resolution of the data in that coastal nearshore environment. And we've got several methods of how we collect that data. It's a very active field season for us right now. We've basically got small boats collecting multi-beam data. We've got aircraft collecting Bathy LiDAR. And we've got ROVs collecting underwater imagery to really help us to characterize and classify the bottom of the Great Lakes in the nearshore environment. So primarily we're working in that 0 to 80 meter water depths. A lot of people, of course, are curious what's out there even further or deeper, but we're really focused right now on that dynamic nature environment along the nearshore.
Yeah, that's cool. Are there any projects you're particularly interested in?
So I actually was just getting the numbers before we went live here. We are collecting over 600 square miles of new Bathy LiDAR. That's actually happening in the next couple of months here. Eastern Lake Superior, Northern Lake Huron, Northern Lake Michigan. But we're also doing some multi-beam work right now around the Apostle Islands, supporting the National Park Service there, as well as down around Washington Island and the entry to Green Bay. So all of it's really exciting to me. We've got multiple parts of NOAA involved and other partners, including the Office of Coast Survey that Tim mentioned, the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, the Great Lakes Environmental Research Lab out of Ann Arbor, our office, and then of course, working with the National Park Service, USGS, and academia to really collect a lot of important data. We've got a really small field window here in the Great Lakes, and so we're trying to collect as much data as possible in that small window.
That's really exciting. I'm excited. So Tim talked about high resolution versus low resolution data in the Great Lakes. What are some of the technologies that can collect this type of data?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we've got vessels right now using multi-beam echo sounders. So Tim mentioned the ping, right? Every sounding, you get a return back. And so with multi-beam echo sounders, you're sending multiple pings down at one time. And so it basically allows us to mow the yard with a boat. Unfortunately, though, we have to be very cautious when we're working in these nearshore environments. Those boats have to operate at a given depth. Otherwise, it could be too risky for the operator, but it also takes more time. Using multi-beam echo sounders, yeah, great picture here, for example. It's slow and steady as it goes, as we like to say when we do multi-beam work. The other instrument that we use, as I mentioned, is Bathy LiDAR, where we actually fly aircraft over the water, and it actually uses 2 different types, or even sometimes 3 different types of LiDAR or lasers. The one can actually measure the coastal nearshore area. The second one is a green band that actually can penetrate the water, and that's allowing us to get bathymetry. But the challenge there is we can only operate where the water's clear enough. And so we have been fortunate in some parts of like Lake Michigan, getting down to 25 meters in water depth using the LiDAR. But anything deeper than that, then we have to go to the multi-beam vessel operations. And so the other thing is we can also use satellite-derived bathymetry, especially if we may have missed a gap between a Bathy LiDAR collect or a multi-beam collect. It's a good way to kind of do reconnaissance of an area too, if we haven't been there in quite some time. But then also too, as we were talking about some of the dynamics of our nearshore environments, you may need to go back and collect data time and time again. And it can be cost prohibitive to either get an aircraft in the air or get a vessel over to that particular location. So we may use satellite-derived bathymetry to look at something that's in particularly changing over time quite quickly.
Yeah. So what does your department in the government do to support these mapping efforts? I think we went over this a little, but
We did a little bit, but yeah, so within the Office for Coastal Management, and I sit within our Science and Geospatial division, we really help to get new data to fill the gaps, to understand what is happening out there in the nearshore environment. Coastal areas are dynamic by nature. And so, we try to identify the right resources, the right time of year, the right partners, because it is a team effort in regards to Lake Bed 2030. It's not something that just our office can take on. It requires multiple different offices. And of course, what's we're helping to do is that coordination piece. Again, I'm a Great Lakes Regional Geospatial Coordinator, and so I'm helping to make sure the right folks are talking and knowing how we fill those gaps effectively and efficiently across the region.
so when you and your partners collect this data, is it made publicly available, and how does the public access it?
Yeah, so NOAA being a federal agency, we do work to make everything openly available. However, there may be these times, like you highlighted earlier with Tim, things like shipwrecks may be sensitive, especially if it's a new wreck or something that hasn't been previously documented. Or again, cultural resources. So we work very closely with state historical preservation offices as well as tribal historical preservation officers, especially if we're going to a new area, just to make sure that, hey, we're aware that there may be something sensitive down there and to react accordingly. But, that we have different ways to either, scrub the data or highlight those important areas and or maybe even work closely with them to ensure that proper data handling is being carried out.
Yeah, it's very important, and I'm excited to hear that everybody is included in all the decisions that are made. So, do you have any final comments for viewers who are interested in what you do or the wider exploration effort going on in the Great Lakes?
definitely encourage folks to check out Lakebed 2030, the conference. It'll be September. The other thing is too, you can follow basically the work we're doing through the C-Sketch website, which is a U.S. interagency coordinated website that helps all the different federal agencies, state agencies, and partners know who's doing what work where in the Great Lakes region here as well. And I'll make a plug also for the Integrated Ocean and Coastal Mapping website through NOAA. You can learn more about what NOAA is doing in terms of the science and data collection, not only in the Great Lakes, but across the nation.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you.
Wow, it's so awesome to have Brandon on the show today. He's such you're an incredible wealth of knowledge and information on this, Brandon. So I encourage others who are watching this maybe to reach out to you or your office to learn more about how NOAA in particular is working on this effort. It's great. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lyndon.
All right, next up, we've got Derek Niles from Orange Forest Marine talking about crowdsourced bathymetry. So we're looking forward to that.
So Tim, you promised you'd share with the audience what crowdsourced bathymetry is. So stop holding out on them.
All right, okay. So this is what crowdsourced bathymetry is. No, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to let Derek share. So let's get started on it, and we'll keep the suspense going for a little bit longer. All right, Derek, welcome to the Seagull live stream. It's great to have you here, and thanks for agreeing to be with us on the show today.
Hey, absolutely, Tim. As always, a pleasure to talk about mapping, underwater mapping, and I certainly thank you for the opportunity to speak with the group.
That's great. Well, Derek, we've known each other for many years now, but you've got a really interesting background. So tell the audience how you ended up, a little bit about your background and how you ended up doing bathymetry or underwater mapping in the Great Lakes.
Sure. It all starts when I was kind of 12 years old, operating a 14-foot aluminum boat up in Georgian Bay and Honey Harbor area where there's all kinds of rocks. And first thing my dad said is, "Don't hit the rocks, right? It wrecks the boat. You're going to get in trouble." And so that kind of started a bit of a passion into the water. I went onward to join the Navy and had the pleasure to sail with the Navy in the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Gulf, the Gulf of Mexico, including about 6 trips to Hawaii that were really, really tough. But all up and down those seaboards. With that, you see the importance of understanding the ocean environment, the water environment, and no more is that even more so than I experienced with my time with the Canadian Coast Guard involved in search and rescue, and knowing where boats get into trouble, how we can rescue them, and what that looks like. All kind of builds into that expertise and that passion in that I that subsequently have used to go on to form Orange Forest Marine back in 2016, just doing some specialty in the survey world. One of the things that really stood out for me was especially about the importance of underwater mapping, is a trip into Suva, Fiji, where we going aground on a reef that may have been recently constructed or recently built. So and charts being off by about 200 yards. So mapping's an important thing, and happy to be part of it.
Great. Well, my understanding is that you participated, or you watched a webinar that GLOS did a few years ago on Lakebed 2030, this initiative to have comprehensive high resolution mapping in the Great Lakes. And then you reached out to us after, and you've been a great partner of GLOS ever since you watched that webinar and offered to get involved. You participated in the generation of the report that GLOS authored on the feasibility of mapping the Great Lakes and how much that would not only cost, but how would we tackle this massive, it's really one of the last areas on Earth that is so poorly understood, and you were very helpful in that. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, no, thanks, Tim. Mapping the underwater environment is a very important piece for all the reasons that you and Brandon talked about earlier. But frankly, it's pretty cool, right? What you normally see on the water surface, you're seeing, and you don't really know and understand what's underneath. And so the ability to see what's on the bottom, to see what that bottom profile looks like in high resolution, yields sort of understanding for our ocean environment. It was an absolute honor to be able to really calculate, I guess, set loose on a mission, right? And your words were, what would it take, right? How would we get it done? And that was the framework for our involvement was, hey, let's develop a plan to take common methodologies or take common technologies that we use now for underwater mapping, and what would it take to fill in the rest of that 85% of the Great Lakes that isn't mapped. And so our contribution to that really articulated the different types of technologies and how we could employ them and how that would cost, and that sort of the costs and the time, 130 to 200 million dollars, and sort of 24 linear years of dedicated survey effort by Brandon and his team to be able to map that. It really showcases the challenge that's ahead, and why we need to sort of be getting started and using all available means to do that.
Right. And one of the other things that came out of that report was that it has to be a multifaceted effort in terms of collecting this data. Certainly there's groups like Brandon and his team and other academic and nonprofit or other organizations that are collecting data in the Great Lakes. But one of the things that you latched onto was, could we empower a whole other group of people to collect data in the Great Lakes as well? Tell everyone about that, because that's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the methodologies when you're looking at it, you can use airborne lidar, bathymetric lidar, multi-beam, single beam has been the traditional means, and up in the Arctic, even lead lines on periodically. But all those different technologies and methods take time and take effort. And with over 4 million pleasure craft that ply the waters around the Great Lakes, coupled with a few thousand or tens of thousand commercial vessels, government vessels, academic vessels that also ply the waters on a routine basis day to day, our thought process is, well, how can we leverage those sailings that occur day in, day out? How do we capitalize on that sea time? How do we latch on to and gather the data that they're collecting through their positional information, through their echo sounders, and go? And that's where leveraging the cloud really comes into play, or sorry, leveraging the crowd, excuse me, really comes into play, of the crowd of vessels that are out on the water, just collecting that data. And that's where that sort of technology was in its infancy, and something that we really latched onto as a means of helping build that great map, the fill in the blanks and fill in the gaps, if you will, for Great Lake by 2030.
Yeah, and that's it. All right. So for those watching, if you missed it, Derek just defined what crowdsourced bathymetry is, which is, it's a collaborative effort by a community of regular people and maybe non-scientific organizations, or really anyone who's got a vessel and an echo sounder, even a fish finder on board. They have vessels and they have assets, and they're interested in collecting and contributing data to an initiative like this, with the simple addition of a small piece of hardware, but not just hardware, it's also software. So Derek, why don't you explain to everyone a little bit about how the whole thing works, particularly if someone wants to get involved and they say, well, I've got a fishing boat, or I've got a fairly large pleasure craft or something, and I'd like to be able to contribute. How does it work? What happens?
Yeah, so I mean, as we know, from a safe navigation perspective, you wouldn't drive your boat in without knowing kind of where you are, or on a chart, right? So most of our vessels have a chart plotter, a GPS-enabled chart plotter that collects their position, their course, their speed, and relates that to a chart, to a map that's commercially available. Everybody's got a chart plotter, right? Most vessels, especially some of your larger vessels or commercial vessels, required to have an echo sounder, right? One of the pieces of safe navigation is knowing how much water depth you have underneath, so you don't run your boat aground, right? So most vessels have a chart plotter, or a GPS-fed chart plotter, and an echo sounder. And our thought process is can we use regular electronics or marine electronics protocols to capture that data that's being collected every time somebody's sailing as they're using their boat? And so we developed what we call the Mussel, and I'll explain why we call it a Mussel in a little bit. But we developed a Mussel data logging kit that allows us to plug into the organic sensors on board those vessels. It collects and there's an example on the screen. You can see a picture of one of our kits that has its own GPS receiver if it need be. It'll measure motion. It'll log into and connect into the vessel's organic system, and then we'll talk about broadcasting in a minute. But it's what the loggers do is every second capture the obviously time, the position of the vessel, and the depth that it's reading from that echo sounder. And with that, we collect it and file it into a file, and we can either store it on board, we can transmit it to a Wi-Fi, or transmit it to shore by way of Wi-Fi or cellular. So we on those that technology, the key part is getting that data off the boat and doing it in such a way that that it's seamless, it's hands off, it's non-interference for those vessels as they go about their business. With that data, we want to pump it up to the cloud, and we can talk about kind of where it goes in a little bit. Tim, that answer your question?
Yeah, it's great. And you let it slip earlier about leveraging the cloud, but you meant about leveraging the crowd, which was quite right. But it really is about leveraging the cloud as well, because this is where the Gloss piece comes in partnership with you. We've developed a cloud-based solution to receive the data that comes off the muscle kit, and then it gets processed automatically, actually, in the cloud. And then that data gets routed through into a global and a public repository of data for the Digital Center for Data within NOAA. And GLOSS is actually an IHO, International Hydrographic Organization, trusted node to push that data through. So this crowdsourced bathymetry is actually a global effort. It's not just limited in the Great Lakes, but we're one of the few organizations, or few groups, I guess, doing this in the Great Lakes. How many vessels are collecting data now as part of this crowdsourced bathymetry effort, and what are your plans for growth?
Well, we've since 2021, we've brought 22 vessels online across the Great Lakes, and this year we're going to be expanding to 32. We've also got about 15, and that's just in the Great Lakes and Great Lakes alone. We've got 15 vessels coming online in the next couple of months to in some of our Arctic communities to shore up some of the surveying that's in that area as well, and those installations are across a broad spectrum. We put them on private vessels, on sailboats, on rescue vessels, government vessels, science, academic, research vessels, commercial bulk carriers. The whole spectrum of different vessels that are out there is what we've got some installs on. During the 2022 season alone, they've sailed over 1,500 nautical miles, collected over 15 million pings or soundings over their 1,300 hours of sea time that we've managed to leverage and capitalize on to help build that bathymetry map and to help fill in some of the gaps that we see within the lakes.
Well, that sounds great. What a great program. Thanks so much, Derek, and good luck to you and Orange Forest Marine to continue to grow this program in the Great Lakes on both sides of the border, because the lakes and the fish, they don't know any boundaries. So it's good to collect the entirety of this data set. So I mentioned earlier about how we've collected, or you mentioned how we've collected millions and millions of soundings. Lyndon, how does having all of these millions of data points, and yes, we pass a copy along to the global repository, but how does that help us make a better map of the Great Lakes?
Well, GLOSS keeps a copy of the data, and every point brings us closer to the goal of Great Lakes-wide high resolution data. So once we get enough data points, then we can start making a map that looks like this.
Wow, that'd be great. And wouldn't it be great to have that, like, for the whole basin? Can you imagine?
Every day I dream about it.
Okay. So moving on, where can more people learn about this, Lyndon?
So Brandon already mentioned, but on September 19 to 21 in Traverse City, we're having the Lakebed 2030 conference in, as I said, Traverse City, hosted by the Northwestern Michigan College, which is one of our partners on Lakebed 2030. It's a hybrid conference, so anyone can attend either in person or online.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing you there, and hopefully many people who are watching, and hopefully Brandon and Derek will be able to join us as well. What a great opportunity for organizations and individuals to get involved and help us achieve our goals. Derek and Brandon, having you online today has been great. Thanks so much to both of you for joining. Really appreciate having you both here.
Absolute pleasure.
And Lyndon, thanks for joining as well.
Yeah, thanks for letting me sub in for Shelby this month. Tim, it's been fun. And as you know, I love this so much, I dream about it.
Okay. Well, thanks again, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this month's live stream on seagull and underwater exploration for the first time in the Great Lakes. And don't forget that all of this video and all of our videos are available at our YouTube channel at Real Gloss. And hit the subscribe button or like the video. We're always happy to have more people learning about what's going on in the Great Lakes, what's going on at the Great Lakes Observing System, and what's going on in Seagull. In the meantime, we hope to see you online and in Seagull and on the water. Bye for now.